Hi everyone. In this video I'm going to show you how to make a Mad Lib, which if you recall from maybe being, 9 or 10 years old, that is one of those stories where you pick a bunch of words based on a prompt, and then those words get filled into sort of a fill-in-the-blank story. So it would be something like, I have a really short example here, where it just prompts for a noun and a verb, and I could say something like dog for my noun and fly for my verb, and if I submit, it generates the rest of the content, and it fills in dog and fly. So it says one day a dog tried to fly, it was not very successful. So I'm going to show you how to use how to put these form inputs in your HTML, and how to use JavaScript to generate the new content. So the first thing you'll need to do is set up your HTML. I'm just going to put a heading at the top, just it says Mad Lib. And then all of the inputs are going to be part of a form. Now, normally this isn't really what you use forms for. So forms are typically used to sort of submit information to a server. That's kind of, think about when you fill out a form on something on a website, usually that information is being like submitted and stored. Like, for example, if you're filling out I don't know, financial information to make a purchase, like credit card and address and things like that, that gets sent to a server, and the server takes care of processing that order or something like that. Well, we aren't working with server-side scripting at all. We're not actually building an entire web app that includes any sort of processing on the server side, or a database or anything like that. So instead, we're just going to use the form to provide the inputs, and then we'll just use JavaScript to grab those inputs from the form. So first, let's set up the form. And so inside this form element, you'll need a label for each to label each of the input boxes. So for example, I'll say noun. And the label, and I'm also going to put a line break here because otherwise these are, I believe these are inline elements, so they would be next to each other. I don't want them to be next to each other. I want them to skip a line. So I'll just put a line break, and then I'll say input, and I have to say what type of input I want. There are all kinds of different types. I can kind of show you what I mean by that, but this is a text box, so the input type is text. Now I'll give it an ID so that I can select it later. Its ID will be noun because that's what I want to put in there. There are other properties like name and value. The value is actually, that would be if you want to specify like a default value that goes inside the box. We don't really need these right now though. Like, we don't need there to be a default value. The user is supposed to provide the value, and that's it. And we don't really need a name. That is more for identifying things when you're submitting the form using a server scripting language. So I'm not really going to include that either. There are sometimes reasons why you might need that, but we don't really need that right now. Now I'll skip a line again. So let me just kind of show you what it looks like. At this point, you've got the heading, it says noun. You notice if you click on the text box, it gets the browser's focus, which means it kind of puts that cursor there, and you can type there. Now that's because the type here is text. What if I said something like, so I'm sure you've seen radio buttons before. This might not actually work because, yeah, it works. So there are more parameters that you'd have to include, but one of those buttons where you like it's just like a yes no button sort of thing. Um, it's called a radio button because you can have a whole bunch of them, and when you push one, it turns off the others, so only one can be selected in a whole group. It's kind of like an old, like a really old radio. I don't know if I don't think they still really do this anymore, but there used to be like selector buttons for like presets on old radios before everything was just a touch screen. And when you push one button, it pops the other buttons back out. So it's kind of like that. Just a little bit of info about why it's called a radio button. But there's all kinds of other form inputs like checkboxes and drop menus and things like that. And we're not gonna get into that because we're making a Mad Lib. So I'm gonna what's it called? Text. Yeah, text. So this is a text box. I'm just gonna keep that as a text box. So I'm just gonna kind of copy this because I know I want more than one here. I'll just kind of change my label. So it's gonna say verb. Still a text box, but its ID is gonna be different. That one's ID will be verb. All right, so now I've got two text boxes. Now forms do have built-in buttons. But again, I don't really need the built-in button function because if you're truly using it as a form, that's what it's intended for. I'm just gonna use a regular old HTML button instead with an on click, and this is going to call a function called Mad Lib that we didn't write yet. So we're gonna have to add this to our script.js. We're gonna have to add a function to that called Mad Lib that's going to process the Mad Lib and put the text on the screen. So that'll just say submit on the button. And then I also want to add one more button because I want to be able to do this again. So button, on click, and this is just going to refresh the screen if you want to try again. So I'll just say location dot reload. Now this is going to reload the page. So it'll clear the boxes and clear the data if you had entered anything previously. And I'll just say try again. So that if you want to try again, you can try again. And so you've got, if I type a bunch of data and I say try again, it just refreshes. So I actually like a space here. So I'm going to put another line break. Let's see how that looks. That's better. Just a little extra space. All right, so that's it. That's the layout. Now I still need to, and you can expand this as well, by the way. Like you can add as many inputs as you want. Keep in mind that if you want to be able to select a specific input by ID, then you'd have to give it a different ID. So moving on to the logic of how this works, we'll need to write the madlib function. So I'm going to go to my script.js, and in script.js, let's write a function. So function madlib, and what we'll need to do is it's going to make much more sense if we store some information in variables and use those variables later. You'll see why this is valuable later, but what a variable is, you may remember this if you've ever done any programming before, like maybe you've done Scratch before, you've used Scratch, and in Scratch there's those orange blocks that can store information for later. That's what a variable is. Right? They were called variables in Scratch. They're called variables in JavaScript. Variables are just a way to store information. It's kind of a storage. It's like a storage container. Right? It actually points to a place in the computer's memory where the data is stored, but you can just kind of think of it as like a container. And this variable, I'm going to create a variable by typing var. That stands for variable. When you want to declare a variable, you have to say var and then give it a name. So I'll call this variable noun, and this variable is going to contain document dot get element by ID. Oops, that is by class name. Get element by ID. And remember that we had the ID noun to select that box by name by ID, and then dot value, which value is just what you actually type into the box. That's the that is the attribute name. That's the attribute name for what you typed into the box. So far, and then put a semicolon at the end of this line. JavaScript expressions need semicolons at the end of them. So we're declaring a variable, and the information stored in that variable, that's what the equal sign means. That variable gets some value, right? We're assigning a single equal sign in JavaScript is assignment. We're assigning information to a variable. And the information is whatever is contained in the element at ID noun dot value. So basically it's just whatever you typed in the box. That's getting stored there. We're going to create another variable for verb. Verb.value. And let's create one more to just I don't think we have a paragraph yet. Hold on. Let me go back to index.html. I'm going to add, after all of my buttons, paragraph tag, we'll give it an ID text, and it's actually going to be empty. There's nothing in it. So this is what will be filled with the content that we generate. So this paragraph tag, this paragraph element contains no text, and we're going to add the text using JavaScript. So create this variable p, and the variable p will be, I'm just going to copy this because it's the same document, but .get element by ID, and it will just change the ID to text. And actually it's not quite the same because we don't need value, we just want to get the element. So P just represents the element, the paragraph element. All right, now we need to construct the content. So we're going to say is P dot inner HTML, that's the content inside the P tag, equals, and we're just going to add some text. So I'll just do that example that I showed you before. One day, A. Now this is a string, and this is a text inside quotes. The term for that, the data type, the type of data this is called a string. That just means text data. And to combine strings together in JavaScript, you can do that with a plus sign. So I'm going to say one day A noun plus tried to, and notice, okay, first of all, that noun is a variable name. So this is what I'm doing, is I'm combining this text with whatever text happens to be stored in noun. What text is stored in noun? It is whatever text you typed in the box. Whatever text you typed in the box for noun, that's what you got when you did the get element by ID dot value. So, you know, before when I typed dog, dog was in the box, so dog was what got stored in noun. So this is the value of declaring these variables. Could I have just like taken all this stuff and put it here like this? Sure, isn't that really annoying to read? Yeah, also it is, and the longer it gets, the more annoying it's going to get to read. So I'm not doing that. I'm going to just use this variable noun, makes it much more readable. So one day a noun tried to, oh, another thing before I move on, I want to point out that I'm including like leading and trailing spaces where I need them, because the content that you type in the box isn't going to have spaces. You're just going to type the word. And if you want there to be spaces in between the words, you have to put the space there. Right? A space is a character, right? Just like a letter, a space is actually a character. It's a piece of data. So that space has to be there. The space has to be here. The space has to be here. And plus signs before and after the variable. So it combines this string with the variable, and it combines all of that with this string. Then it combines another variable, verb. I'm going to end that sentence with a period and space. It was not very successful. Semicolon at the end outside of the quotation marks here. So you've got the text that you actually type out is in between quotation marks, and then you've got plus signs connecting the variables to that text. Right? And that is all going to be set to the inner HTML with the paragraph tag. In other words, right here, this is what inner HTML means. Text would go here. Like this is the inner HTML, the stuff that's in between the tags. So I'm erasing that because that's being taken care of by the JavaScript. All right, let's try running it. So just like my example before, if I say dog tried to fly, failure. What happened? Document.get elements. Okay. I have an extra S somewhere. Right here. So line 2, if you copied exactly what I typed, I made a typo here and I said get elements instead of get individual element. Try that. There we go. One day a dog tried to fly. It was not very successful. Yeah, so if you copied exactly what I did, I made a typo here and I said get elements by ID, but it's single element. So if you have an error, if you get an error message, check and make sure you didn't do that. So you can expand on this now, and you can add additional text input boxes and add additional text to your Mad Lib and make a longer made up story that has random words stuck in it. So there's your Mad Lib example. Hope you find that helpful for understanding a little bit about how variables work and how JavaScript can combine variables together with other data, and that you can take that data and insert it somewhere into your web page.